I think it's like all part of the thing that we do, which is that like at its best, we're tapping into a flow that is so much bigger than us. It's why we put up with this horrible industry. Kind of. Like we all put up with this like horrific abusive industry because we're like all looking to tap into that flow again that you get to tap into sometimes. Hi, my name is Cristin Milioti, and this is called The Process. And I'm here with cristin from HBO Max's Made for Love. He's our brilliant composer. We've never met till now. Hello.
Hi,
Or
Chris.
until like 5 minutes ago.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good.
So you're zooming in from France.
Yes.
And do you
Yeah,
live there full time?
I do now. Yeah. It kind of went official when the confinement went down last year.
Sure. Sure.
Yeah.
So I'm so excited to talk to you because I love the music for our show so much. And I think that like music is like this other actor. And I don't know, like it's so hard to know when you're working on something and when you're acting in something rather, and you don't know how things are going to come together in post. There's like always like a CGI element, like with Zelda, but then there's also like the music of it all, which can change everything. You can change like the molecules of a scene depending on how you score it. And I love what you did so much because our show, as you know, has such a tricky tone. Like that was so uh, it was a challenge that we all had as a cast and like with Christina and Alyssa on set trying to figure it out. And I feel like that was always something I was wondering, like, what is the music like this going to be like? The music for this going to be like? And I feel like you completely went above and beyond. And I just want to pick your brain. I know I have like questions to ask you, but I actually also just as like, your fellow collaborator, except in this like weird way of this like blind handing off kind of um, what were your inspirations? Like I have specific questions about like the choral voices and like, but what was how did you approach it? How did you sort of like get in there?
Um, I sat on the floor for a long time and just
Mhm.
cried for hours. And
Me too.
um, well, first off, I'm so glad that you like it because not on a different subject, but it is always a thing that I finish music for these projects, and quite a lot of the time I don't speak with any of the
Right.
actors. So sometimes I wonder because you have to really, uh, the performances are so delicate and amazing and subtle, especially because I get to watch them over and over and over and over. So I get to see this with no music and the subtleties that you would be doing. Sometimes for me, it was also about what not to do, or sometimes turning my music off, watching the scene dry, and in basically back to just wondering at the end if it's I just sometimes wonder if actors are like, God, he's completely ruining this my steez. I mean, because it
Right.
it's
Yeah.
such a it really is a total dance. And I was glad when I saw the very first cut that a lot of what I had imagined was in there, and even more, that it's like, okay, you and Byron are kind of this classic. I feel like there's a timelessness to how you're presented, how we start at the hub.
Yeah.
And so that was the very start of everything, was like, okay, I'm going to just start in futuristic space exotica lounge music.
Yes.
All right, man. Hey, lady, can I talk to you?
No, 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 no.
Well, it's cool. There's a man on my phone who said he knows you. Are you Hazel?
One thing that I felt very strongly when I watched like the finished product, speaking to what you were just talking about, was that you nailed this tone of like, you begin in this very like Stepford wife place, this very like curated, but there's this like horrible dread underneath it, which I feel like your music from the get-go is this like, it's like what you were saying, like a lounge, like a very fancy place where like everything's fine, except that there's something underneath it that's very menacing and like, for lack of a better term, spooky, and like a
Yeah.
little, and like that that it's like an old form of nostalgia, like an old world, what we think of as like, it reminded me almost, and these terms are all going to be clunky, but like there was like some ghosty part of it that reminded me of like if Byron had watched a video as a kid of like, these are the houses of the future. Do you know, like
Yeah.
those videos you would see in like museums at Epcot and stuff? And like, but it was also so rich and you really like follow our emotions. Because to also what you were saying, like, right, you can, every shot, every reaction shot can be changed like that with music.
Of course, yeah. Yeah.
So what were there things that you based it on, like when you were saying, did you say like space, galaxy?
Um,
Like
s- s-
I know that's like where you built from.
there's this whole genre of space age bachelor pad music from the 50s, right? And it was back in that time where people were imagining how we would be with UFOs, like in 2000, how like the hub would have been in like 1998, and then the space age bachelor would have been 2000. You know? Yeah.
When I was listening to it, I was also like, one of my favorite instruments on earth is the mellotron, which I don't know if you used any mellotron.
Yes.
I don't know, but one of the
Yeah.
things I love about that instrument is that you have this like sort of future ghost tone that's actually really warm and
Yeah.
like of the earth, and it's like so specific, and I felt like that so often listening to your score, being like, oh, these are two things going on at once, which is what the show is. You have this like high
Yeah.
end space bubble, and you
Yeah.
have this like literally covered in dirt story of like a father and a daughter who have been estranged, who are like trying to get through each other's walls, and I just really
Yeah.
love that. I
Oh,
really like that a lot.
no, I think you absolutely nailed the whole thing. I mean, that what you're talking about with mellotrons is that those were real instruments recorded to tape
Hmm.
back, right? So it's dirty, but it makes it timeless somehow. It seals it kind of like when you listen to vinyl. And
Yeah.
that's the same thing. It's sort of like these kind of tones went very well with everything and needed to be juxtaposed with we can go hi-fi sort of wide and surround it with completely new um, uh, characters, musically speaking.
I was gonna say, for anyone who doesn't know what a mellotron is, I direct you to the beginning of Strawberry Fields, right? That's right, and then any Fiona Apple, go into John Bryanville, like you'll very quickly know exactly as soon as you hear that intro to Strawberry Fields, you'll know exactly what we're talking about. Um,
Yeah,
so another question for you about tone is like, obviously this show goes through so much. You were just reminded me of it with the scene with Herringbone, is that one second we will be sort of like extreme sci-fi, the next it'll be like an action film, the next it'll be like a comedy, the next it was one of the things that drew me to it, because I have like spiritual ADD as like a person, an actor, like
yeah,
I want it all. And that's like what I find, it's what I'm drawn to as like a viewer and a consumer of things, is that like I want something that reflects life, which is that it's like many, many things in one. When you approach that sort of, we turn on a dime a lot on this show, is that something that you do consciously? Like you're like, okay, and this is like what is set for the more comedic points, or is it more organic? Like, do you let the scenes sort of like take you along? How do you approach that?
yeah. You know, I think I feel the same way as you though about the I like to be jumping around. I love collaging things. Like before I started the show, I wrote about 50 small pieces for it. Just like without picture because I like to take the
Based
pieces.
on what you read, basically?
Yeah,
Release or like what were you?
things that I had read.
Okay.
I'd say about 80%, and then 20% were from the very first, shots that were sent to me, the first pieces from episode one.
I feel like I work actually it's so interesting to hear this because I think of what we both do is actually so similar, but I know that like the day to day is very different in a way, even though I'm sure we're using very similar parts, or else we wouldn't be doing this. We're using similar parts of our like soul and like atoms and memory and heart and brain, but like
Yeah.
I feel like I try to like let scripts wash over me for months and months and months before
Uh,
I ever dive in, and I'm like, and then this like it's sort of like sinking into like the jelly of the world or something. um,
right. Yeah.
so that's
Yeah.
fascinating to hear.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so how have you been doing music your entire life? How did you get into this? How did you know you were going to do this? Were you drawn to film? This is like many questions in one, but basically like what was your journey here? And how early were you in the music world?
I was in pretty early, I think around 6 or 7. And it's all, when I look back at it all, it's just been uh, great. I think just great luck in the sense of simply saying there was a piano in my basement. I grew up in the mountains of Colorado in a very small town, and my parents had a lot of different vinyl and a lot of soundtracks, and you have a lot of time in your basement in the winter, in the late 70s, early 80s. And I think I was lucky with each teacher because my middle school band teacher and my high school band teacher, they were both jazz band.
I was in
And
jazz band.
were
Yeah.
you?
Yeah,
What
yeah,
you
yeah. Jazz band was like a huge part of like my I'm very nurtured there.
Me
Yeah.
too.
Go on. Yeah.
What did you play?
I was the singer for jazz band. So I
Really?
sang in front of like the entire like big brass band, and we went to competitions, and we like that was like where I hung out. Then did you start were you in bands in high school? Did you write? Were you at that point were you like I want to be a musician, or did you like professionally like I want to do this with my life, or were you still when did you know that?
I think I think it was never even a thought until it had to be like, oh, you have to pick something to do because
Yeah.
I I just did it all the time and I loved it and I had bands. I had bands. I That's another thing about where I grew up, and it's probably geography in general. It's like it was kind of normal in Colorado because everyone had a basement. It's kind of normal to have bands.
Yeah. I know some of my have I was also in a ton of bands in high school, and I have such incredible memories of various people's basements and of like trying things out and trying songs that we'd heard, and like at first you do it just like you hear it on the CD, and you're actually like what you're going for is to like mimic the CD, and then you start like taking it apart and everyone's trying different things, and it was like these beautiful summer nights in like dingy basements in New Jersey, and I hope that kids are still doing that. Like, I mean,
I
COVID
Yeah.
notwithstanding, but I hope there's still a lot of teenagers trying out instruments in basements because it's some of my fondest memories of growing up. So okay, so then you were like, I'm in a band, I'm on the road. What'd you play in that band?
Keyboards.
Keyboards, okay. And
Yep.
so you're out on the road, you're making music, you're touring with your band, and how was that? And then how did you get more into like the composing world? Were you with more bands? Sort of like how did you find your way?
I think the big changeover was when uh, T-Bone Burnett heard my wife and I's band on a morning show and basically called us and just wanted to meet, and
Wow.
we we didn't really know T-Bone or didn't know much about him at the time, and then it just became uh, here we go, like just start doing a lot of work with him, and he started giving me cues and like try this and do this cue,
Cool.
and so it was definitely all just good fortune, you know, to meet someone, to have someone like that who's so open. He's so wide open to so many genres of music, and he doesn't like to tell you much in
Right.
that, which freaked me out for a while because I'm like, you know, I can do anything. That's his magic, is he just wants you to get there yourself, and that taught me a lot. But it took me a while to learn it.
Byron, you like what you see? Yeah? You want to get a little closer? Let's get right in there. Let's get right into this filthy, disgusting public urinal.
Okay, so I have some other, these questions just sort of like, well, no, I should also ask, how did you come to Made for Love? And then I have more questions about like inspirations in your life and mind. But how did you come to be a part of the show?
Um, Again, I think it was luck. Because my agents had brought it across and said, "Hey, we think you'd be perfect for this. We're speaking with some people at Paramount." It was just bizarre because I didn't know anyone. I didn't really
Yeah,
meet anyone, and it was Christina and Alyssa and everyone, you know, all the amazing editors and
yeah,
the team on one call, just to say hello and talk about it. And then there was a lot of quiet time, and so anyway, it it turned out amazing because
yeah.
we seemed to be on the same page,
Well,
and
that's
it's
all I was hearing about too. Because when they told me that you were on it, I of course like you know, because music is like so. I listen to a ton of music before working. Like I have playlists for every character. Like music is like how I move through the world, and also how I like move through
ah
work. And so I was constantly like, who's doing the music? Who's doing the music? Who's doing the music for this? And
oh
then
really?
they told me it was you, and I like immediately Google stalked you and like and was very excited.
You're like, fire him.
No, I was so excited based on you know everything you'd worked on, and I was so excited to see what you did with it. And also what I was hearing during post was like how much you guys were completely on the same page from like the get-go, which is so incredible. And is that rare? Like I'm sure it's different the way it is with acting too. Like it must be different with each project and with each group of people, but I feel like that's always very special when that happens actually.
Yeah, I mean, you probably have it's like the same thing of when what you've developed for what you're going to do, and then it's time to like show it. Like for me, it's always I have to constantly remind myself to just keep on like going with my goosebumps on it and just
Yeah,
do it uh, because you're like a weirdo inventor.
yeah.
You're just going to send something that you're conjuring up out of nothing to sort of
That's the thing that also like really blows me away by what you do. I also am I'm one of my closest friends is a writer, and I'm always like, so you know, I have some help when I create a person. I have like source material, and you guys go in there and you create an entire world. And like I know there are things like you could look at dailies, you could read scripts, but you're still like what you have is so precious and important to people because people don't even what you're working in is also like subconscious too. Like you are like elevating the story. You're like another editor and another actor, like I said earlier. And I don't know, I'm so in awe of that skill of being able, and I'm sure it's very scary too, to be like, I have to create this like soundscape planet for galaxy system, and it's like that's wild
Yeah.
that you do that.
No, you know what else too, Kristen? It's also it's sort of like I go kind of all over the place in the whole beginning period because I want to try so many things because I really want to like it, working on it all the way through too. I want it to stay. So it's like if I commit to something early, I just say I need to kind of do so much. And sometimes it just depends how much time you get to be with the directors or, you know, Christina, Alyssa, and like be able to sit in a room normally and like bounce things off and like, let's just listen to, here's why I wrote this little piece and this. And I have 7 ways we could do this opening scene.
Yeah. I sort of asked a version of this earlier, but actually, like, was there a piece that either ended up as a certain scene or a scene? Like, what was the moment where you were like, oh, I've cracked the set? Because I, from what I'm understanding, right, like at the beginning, you sort of start with like maybe larger shapes or general ideas, but then like, was there a moment or was there a piece or a scene that made you laser in on what it ended up being?
You know, I think the one, it's like in episode 1 where Hazel, you are sitting outside and Byron, you're reading, Byron and Herringbone and Tiffany are walking away. It's the start of the show before the main titles. That was the place where I think I just started, that's where I ended up writing the main theme, is from watching. I wrote about 10 different things for your sass, like your style in that whole section, because I thought everything is all involved in this one piece of what we're seeing here and where this is going,
Right.
and your attitude, and it's like your look and the timing, the smile, the flip off,
Yeah.
go to the sky, yeah, dolphins.
That's a lot.
So yeah, and I actually I gave the editors a bunch of this music, and when they made their edits, they picked that one, the one that I thought was working the best. They picked. I didn't tell them.
Oh, cool.
I don't label it like this is action. I just leave it alone so that they can make their own decisions. And then when they sent it back and I saw it, I thought, yep, this is definitely.
So, okay, so that's interesting. So I was sort of assuming that when you create a piece, right, like say any of the stuff with Herringbone, the more sort of like thrillery, action-packed stuff, you don't send that necessarily and say like, just FYI, this is for this scene. You sort of like have your own feelings, but you leave it up to them.
Well, that was only
Unless
for
you feel super strongly, or no?
well,
Sorry.
it's actually it's actually for the beginning phases when they're like, hey, we're gonna start to edit. We don't have locked picture, but can you give us any of your music just so we can be using your music and not temp music?
Yep.
And so
Yeah.
yeah, so they were really those guys were really in tune on that. Like
That's cool.
again, it's all taste of music. So it's like when editors get this music, they could be like, oh, I have to work with this. And it makes it hard because they need to sell their cuts and do these things. And anyway, we were on the same page. So they were temping with it. And then when I'd see it back, then I'd say, okay, I'm with this idea. And that was the beginning, helped a lot for me to just say, okay, this is going to break this is breaking open one big part of the sound, is just this combination of the lounge vocalists with electronic synth, with a beat, with sort of the quirky movement of the other instruments and the chord change.
Well, okay, so another question. I love the theme for our show, and what I love is that it's sort of like actually what we're talking about. I feel like perhaps without someone even knowing it consciously, it's like setting you up for the sort of like fabric of the show while being wonderful to listen to and recognizable, which I think is what is like what also, you know, one of my favorite parts about when I watch a show that I love is when I like hear that theme, I get like excited because it's almost like Pavlovian. Like I like start drooling when I hear the like opening chords or whatever. So how did
Yeah.
you come up with that theme? Did that come from like, or did you know that was the theme when you wrote it?
I didn't. I just knew that it was kind of encompassing of the whole the overall picture
Yeah.
as I made it for sure. And it sometimes the main theme comes a lot later after working on things because you get to a point and it's like you write this piece for something that all of a sudden it becomes, oh, this is completely it just depends on
Yeah, sure.
being able to write the main theme first. Is great if you're going to constantly like use this theme over and over and over again. And I did use that theme in a ton of different ways, and it worked in so many ways because it the way that it moves, it doesn't necessarily make you turn emotionally, I guess. It kind of keeps you straight, like, oh, we're kind of turning here, but oh, we're going here. You're always like that. So when I would play it slower on different instruments, and I don't think viewers or many people would even notice it, but it is definitely constantly sort of this theme behind. So that's for the subconscious feel of how it is. But it's also all luck,
For
honestly.
sure.
Yeah.
I know that's how, you know, I feel like that with acting sometimes too. Sometimes like you're so prepared, you give so much work, but you cross all your T's and you dot your I's, but like also at the what is very magic about what we do is there is like something ephemeral that is either there or it's not. And it's like the effort of many people catching lightning in a bottle. It is a group of like hundreds of people capturing
Yeah.
lightning. And it is a wonder that anything is ever made.
I know.
Like my main takeaway from like being alive.
I'll
Yeah.
bet. I know. And that it does amaze me because that side, like for music, we can get moving with 1 to 6 people, like let's do it. And the production and your entire to get these pictures done that you do, it's just it blows my mind. It
Yeah.
really
It
is.
blows my mind. I don't know how anything is meant. I've been on so many things, and each time I walk away being like, wow, this is like what we do is crazy. The odds, the fact that anything, but that is still like the exciting thing that I feel like all of us in some way maybe chase a bit is that like weird electric ghosty thing that happens when something that is greater. Is it greater than the sum of its parts? Yeah, when like is that the phrase that I'm thinking of? When like
Yeah.
everyone comes together and acts as like a conduit for something that like none of us could have done on our own. And I feel like, yeah, sometimes
Yeah.
we work really hard on things and they come out bad. There's like nothing you can do.
Right. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
yeah.
Yep.
Um, okay. So are there any soundtracks in your life? This is like sort of a more like um I guess bubblegummy question. Is there one that's like your favorite or that like when you're always like this is the one that like um I hold in regard as like, I don't know.
It's so hard. I know. It's every day I would answer it differently.
Yeah, sure.
And it's funny because I think recently there's tons of classics, like all the classics that we all know are amazing. And then recently there's just some that I think, well, first of all, the Rocky soundtrack from beginning to end is when you watch that movie again, you see that Bill Conti he just perfected something incredible throughout that film. And that's a weird random one because not weird but he connected something. It was like an underdog. I love the underdog story and the theme and how in times when he's walking around alone, that score it's all Phil Conti did an amazing job with that. What about you?
In terms of like a favorite score,
Yeah.
I mean, weirdly, like what comes to mind in a sort of a nostalgic way, in the sense that like perhaps because I've like watched these movies so much, and it's like a very basic answer, but it's one that like I immediately am thrown into that world, is The Godfather. Like that
Yes.
score, that every movement from the first two films, like I immediately am back in like a living room with Michael Corleone. Like, and it's, yeah, it's just that is one that I think of as like so incredibly visceral and Pavlovian.
You know what? 'Cause that's Nino Rota, the
Yeah,
composer, who is like, he's probably one of my top favorite because he's the
sure.
same thing. He's got that thing where he can, I mean, he can be so playful, but he can go to the heart and he can like bounce around in his instrumentation. And I've been listening to all these Italian composers from that time, and they all have this thing, like of course Morricone and all of them. It's
Yeah,
just they it is it their lifestyle, because it's kind of like it can be so deep, but then it can be like so goofball
right. Yeah. Yeah,
fun.
that is true.
It's
Yeah.
yeah, so that's a good pick. I'm with you on that for
Yeah,
sure.
it's just one that like really is like heart heavy. It
Yeah.
makes me feel very Italian. Like when I hear it, I like immediately like do a very Italian like like grasping at my chest or something. Like I just, and it's warm and it's very deep and emotional and um instantly recognizable. So that's the one that
Yeah.
comes to mind. And then I have my favorites in terms of like, you know, I feel very strongly about the Kill Bill score as well as their musical choices, because again, that's something that like I have like a cellular connection to that movie. That was a huge deal for me when I was a teenager, and that is such an icon, like immediately puts me back in a movie theater at, you know, wherever it is that I saw it, like a giant AMC somewhere, and it's incredibly recognizable. And like it took me on every single turn of those films, which is like, you know, some of my that those are like two of my favorite films of all time.
Yeah, and that's the thing too. It's like those film like Quentin and Scorsese, they use source so incredibly. It's like Goodfellas. It's
Yeah,
like nonstop with that, the track from track to track,
yeah.
how it takes you through it. And there's no, I don't think there's any real score in most Scorsese movies.
Oh, is that
It's
true? Maybe that's
mostly
true. Yeah.
mostly a lot of the source, and you're so right. I mean, it's Quentin does the same thing, and it takes you somewhere, and you'll remember it forever, and you'll hear that song forever.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's beautiful.
yeah,
There's
yeah.
something else that just popped up in my brain too, and now it just like flitted away in terms of, oh yeah, I was in a post production process one time, which I think everyone should do all of the roles on a show to get like the full. It was wildly informative. I co-created and co-wrote and EP'd a pilot that never went anywhere, but I was able to sit in like the editing room for 8 weeks. And I,
Yeah,
as you can imagine, was extremely obsessive about like the music choices.
right.
It was like the most fun that I had. And we never got to the point where it was scored, but like even like the temp music that we would use, I would lose my mind over, because I was like, but this is going to change. Like you could change a room's mind if you use the right song. Like I was endlessly obsessive about it,
Yeah.
including things that were for like comedic, you know, like I was very into the comedic use of Mambo #5 on that. And like it was so funny to be able to like, I don't know, it just was, that was one of my favorite parts of that process. um
Nice.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's,
I
music cues are just they are really, they're chemical.
totally chemical.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. No, that's I'm so I figured I knew that you're like, I know you're a musician.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah,
and but it does all intertwine, doesn't it?
it
Because
does.
to have that goes into your acting, and like you said, your preparation, and it's that tonality. I mean, do you film? Do you ever ask to have anything playing while you're filming the way sometimes?
No, I know of actors who do that. I don't think my New
Yeah,
Jersey sensibility would let me do that, even though I would love to. I eventually will. Like
right.
I don't, or something. But like I have very extensive playlists for each character, and I like listen to them obsessively when I'm getting ready in the morning. Driving to work is like a big, if I'm in LA, if I'm in New York or wherever. um but a lot of like as I'm getting into costume, as I'm like blasting it, or it's in my earbuds and it's like over and over and over and over and over to just sort of call up the parts of this person that I'm going to be for the day.
Yeah,
um,
yeah.
but yeah, it's definitely a huge part of it. And I think it's like all part of the thing that we do, which is that like at its best, we're tapping into a flow that is so much bigger than us. It's why we put up with this horrible industry. Kind of. Like we all put up with this like horrific abusive industry because we're like all looking to tap into that flow again that you get to tap into sometimes. And
Right.
because like the people are I also love collaborating with the people that I get to meet, but it does feel very musical. It feels like a band at its
Yeah,
best. You
right.
feel like a band.
Yeah,
And I don't know if that's because that's like how I started. Like that those were my first sort of like collaborations, or I mean, singing, I've sung for way longer than I've acted. And I would say that that was like the thing that gave me the sort of like creativity bite, or whatever, the like wanting to create things, I mean.
all right. Hey, it's Keefus. This has been The Process. Just want to thank you, Kristen, for the great conversation. It was
Thank
really
you.
great to finally meet and talk to you.
Totally, absolutely. After all this time and hearing so much about you and then hearing so much of your work, it was really wonderful to talk.
Thanks.
Yeah.